Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Security Repo Podcast. Today, we have a very interesting episode. We're going to be focusing on offensive security, and we have a great guest with us here, which is Erik Cabetas. Now, Erik has been hacking apps since the early 2000s. He's previously worked on big consulting companies, software vendors, and even ran an e-commerce security team for over 3 years. In 2011, Erik founded IncludeSec to bring together an amazing hackers to kick butt for the Silicon Valley and New York City. Since then, IncludeSec team has performed thousands of assessments in over 35 languages for some of the largest companies and leading tech platforms in the US. And outside of his day job, Erik has won a number of ethical hacking contests, including Defcon Capture the Flag, which is one of the biggest ones that there is. So I'm interested to kind of finding more about that. But with the bio out the way, Erik, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for the intro. Yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, I kind of just want to jump straight into it. It's interesting you bill your company as are offering offensive security, and you're making a distinction between that and pen testing. I'm hoping you could just start us out by explaining what is the difference between offensive, which most people I think would immediately think red teaming exercise, versus pen testing, and what is the difference?
Sure, absolutely. This is a kind of this whole concept of like what are the things that people do in assessment activities, assurance activities. This has been on my mind for quite a bit. It's one of our reasons our industry just still kind of, although we've been doing this stuff 20, 30 years, it still feels a little immature, because if you tell somebody, oh, let's have a pen test, that actually has more than one meaning. It's not well defined. So for us at IncludeSec, basically we're a bunch of like awesome senior expert hackers. And when you have folks like that, and our clients bring us every type of technology under the sun, we could have an Electron app, a web app, a mobile app, a kernel driver, an IoT platform. It's literally every type of technology we've done. Well, not every type, but the majority, let's say that. So when you have that much variety, there's not every type of activity is applicable to every platform, right? Like I can't do static analysis on a platform where there are no static analysis tooling, whether open source or commercial. So either I make my own or I just don't do static analysis. So it depends on each one. Like for instance, we learned how to hack TiVo apps. There was nothing much you can do with that because there's no tooling, there's nothing out there. So you have to create everything from scratch, and then everything is mapped to something that exists before it. So how do you hack a mobile app? You kind of hook it up to Burp over the network proxy, and you figure out a workflow to do that. So we try and map everything to other things. How do you hack a native app like a C++ server? Well, you write a lot of fuzzers. That's one way of doing it. So all of these different tasks, all of these different activities, I call just generally assessment activities for the end goal of assurance. So we might write custom fuzzers, custom static analysis tools. We might write dynamic tracers that check memory and inspect things. For a fuzzing platform, we might write crash binning tools. And all of these are kind of find vulnerability type tools. We may also write some custom exploit vulnerability tools. So if we're on an engagement and we find a type of a vulnerability and there's hundreds and hundreds of instances, we'll automate the exploitation of that as much as possible. And those are all custom things. So all of these custom tooling, whatever it may be, I call that just generally offensive stuff. It's not necessarily like in the vein of the pen testing, but it might be related. So our industry doesn't have good definitions around these things, so hence I just generally call it offensive or assessment activities for assurance.
It does make sense, and I do kind of agree that there is. We don't have solid definitions, but we seem to have a lot of acronyms. You know, a lot of marketing companies like to come up with different types of titles and labels, but in terms of broad-reaching the definitions that people understand, then yeah, I do think that we're a little bit lacking in that sense.
I like to say that the RSA conference is where acronyms are born.
So look, you've been involved in security for a while now, and I'm going to ask a question. And this question could probably take us for the rest of the podcast, but we'll see where it goes. But you've done tens of thousands, thousands of assessments or audits of offensive security, and I'm curious to know, are there surprising findings that you regularly come across? Like, is there something that people may think that I guess what I'm trying to ask is there fruitful things that you try that regularly work that are a little bit surprising?
So we focus on software and applications. So we don't necessarily do the network pen testing and the red teaming much. It's very rare that we would do that type of stuff. So the types of platforms that I mentioned earlier are mobile web, low level, high level, everything in between. Those are the types of things we do. And OWASP top 10 is a thing that I think pretty much does ring true. There was some debate. I remember having some debate with Jeff and Dave when they were maintainers of OWASP top 10 like 8-9 years ago. I was saying, is OWASP top 10 the most frequently found things, or is it the most impactful found things, or is it a mix of the two? It's the impact and the frequency. And they actually had different definitions, even though both these men maintained OWASP. They actually had different definitions when I asked them individually. But for me, the OWASP top 10, at least on the web side, is pretty aligned with the top things that we're finding. Authorization problems are probably the number one thing we're finding, and that's in the OWASP top 10, top 3. Not finding is injection problems, especially SQL injection, anywhere near as much as they used to, and that's why I think they've fallen from number 1 to number 8 or something on the OWASP top 10. So I think at least on the web side of things are generally aligned to that. But a project we did in December was look at a network appliance, and that network appliance had a UDP server on it, and that it didn't really have any web things applicable to it, but we found hundreds of memory corruption, buffer overflow type concerns with it. So it really just depends on the tech stack of the component that we're looking at. There's nothing that I would say is across the board exactly the same. So for something that's like a native server like that, more memory corruption. For something that's more web, I think authorizations probably are number 1.
It sounds very situational. And that gets back to I think the main premise of offensive security versus here's a box of pen test, and we're going to apply this and hope that you fit this model. It reminds me of something we were talking about recently internally: false positive versus false negative, looking for the wrong thing versus missing alerts for the wrong thing, trying to apply the wrong model to the wrong box. In a previous conversation, actually, you had mentioned a term around just these generic security assessments and generic pen testing, the decline of utility, which I really liked as a term. I was hoping you could maybe explain in context, what did you mean by that? What do you mean there's a decline in utility of security assessments going on out there that you're witnessing?
So most of our clients are B2B type companies, whether they make some SaaS platform or whether they make some Soho networking device for a small business. They're mostly making software for other businesses. And the reason why they're doing security assessments, pen testing, whatever you want to call it, are primarily to meet some sort of business need. So it might be compliance like PCI DSS. It might be regulatory requirements from the SEC, financial, or maybe federal, like CISA is putting out new things. There's new executive orders. So maybe it's regulatory. And then maybe it's contractual obligations, right? So I have a partner, let's say, you're making an app that integrates into Spotify or Meta's, Facebook enterprise platform, or you're making some app that fits into one of these things, you have to meet the security obligations. So when you're doing all of these things, most of the obligations just say, and this goes back to the definitions, you must have a pen test. They just generically state something like that. And when you and that's important, because when these things were first created 10, 15, 20 years ago, nobody was doing that. So now they bring this concept to baseline the industry and say, all right, at least people are doing something. But they don't evolve it. They don't mature it from that. And it's just like still says the same language from 20 years ago, and it's not been adjusted in any way. So what happens when that happens is you've got a great variety of talent and execution in the pen testing space. So you've got not just the seniority and experience of the individuals on the team, but you've got the methodologies that they use, or the firm where they work uses. They've got the specific technologies that they use. So there's all these different layers that pen test from company A could be completely different from pen test from company B. But if company A has all of these things, they have the maturity, they have the automation, they have all sorts of talent, what should happen is they find lots of security concerns, right? And that should mean that the assurance you have of that platform is higher. Now, if company B doesn't have all those things, they have junior people that are a year out of school, haven't really done this professionally, then it logically states that those folks won't find as much. And maybe they're at a team that doesn't have a mature methodology and is not aided by technology well. So they're individually now finding well within a framework that's not going to let them find much. So that's the big difference. So I think we're a little bit more like company A. Some of our competitors are a little bit like more company B. But what if the costs are 2x different? What are companies going to go with? They're going to go with company B. Because that meets their obligation of like, oh, well, I meet this obligation for my compliance. So the utility of this assurance activity that we do, pen testing, is being lowered across the board in the industry. And I really feel that all of the compliance and regulations need to be updated to bring the industry back up. So we're in the same boat 10, 20 years ago. Nobody was doing pen tests. Okay, now people are doing pen tests. Well, everyone's doing bad pen tests now, so we need to do good pen tests. Instead of bring the whole industry down, we need to bring it back up again. That's my personal opinion.
Makes a lot of sense. If you're chasing, it's like the Dora metrics. If you're chasing the Dora metrics in DevOps just to chase them, just because you think, hey, that's going to make me awesome. If I can neck it will improve things, but that's not the goal. The goal is I need to fix my organization from the ground up. I need to actually improve my security. So that's an interesting conversation of like, I'm checking a box versus I'm actually working to improve my security, which eventually will check the box.
And all of this stuff is kind of discussed in economics game theory, right? Like, why is someone going to do this? What is your motivation for doing it? If it's extra cost and extra effort, why would you do it? So we need to change the game to really restate there's a objective reason why you need to have good assurance on your platforms, and not just like a generic vulnerability scan from some teenagers, which is literally what some people are doing.
It is really funny, the checkbox thing is, you can really tell a difference between a lot of conferences is when, I've been on the booth duty before of vendors, and people come to you and they ask you what you do, and then they bring out the checklist and it's like, well, what box does this literally tick in this? Well, it doesn't tick anything because we're on the kind of bleeding edge of, then not interested. like it's all about cyber insurance. It's all about meeting the policy requirements. It's about making sure that if they get hacked, they can go, well, we ticked all the boxes, I can keep my job. But enough rambling about that. I want to ask a hard question now. How do we improve it? If you said that we've gone down, how do we get this assurance? What are the things? Is it going to be legislation? Is it going to be an industry trend change? Will people finally get sick of having these breaches? How do we do it, and why will we do it?
Yeah, happy to address that. I think I want to start with something you mentioned at the end there. How do we address these breaches? Because the current state of everything that I'm talking about is yielded from that. So if you don't elevate all of the assurance, then you're just going to have constant breaches, right? Like you have to really
Mhm.
bring that up. Why did SolarWinds happen? Because perhaps they weren't doing the right assessment activities, and if they were, then that wouldn't have happened. Um, so how do we fix it? Legislation, I think that is part of it, unfortunately, and I hate to have heavy-handed kind of legislation, but if we don't, and I've heard rumors that there are going to be possibly executive orders from the U.S. government that say that mandate things like memory safe languages being incorporated into software. As far as if you want to sell it to the U.S. government, which is the largest
Yeah.
purchaser of software in the world, then you have to use a memory safe language. So if that happens, that would change the game. But each of these compliance and regulations, the common ones, SOC 2 Type 2, PCI DSS, all of the HIPAA, all of these things that you hear all the time, they need to have the language changed. They need to decide, okay, we've been here a long time, decades now, time to elevate things. And unless they do that, then it's not going to happen. And it's the constant battle because all of the people that need to meet these compliance requirements are like, oh, it's more time and effort, and it's going to increase the costs to to maintain and create our technology, and we have to pass that cost on to consumers. So I think, and I just pitched this last week on LinkedIn, I really think like CISA and some of these big governmental organizations need to put out more. It's like right now the stuff that they're putting out is just general guidance, like, oh, here's some things in general. I think they need to like do some big moves, like, hey, here is the guide to migrating your C and C++ app to Rust, and we're going to sponsor we're going to make a contest on technology to innovate and make it easier to port to memory safe languages your native applications, right? So if they had more contests and they were able to give grants to create technologies that make all this easier, then everything's going to be easier, right? Like you want to minimize the cost and effort for companies, make the safest path, cheapest path, and simple. And I think it can be done. It just takes a very particular type of strategy that so far I've not seen the U.S. government or other large organizations in the world do.
Yeah. Well, I often say that Log4j happened 1 year too soon because that year the SBOM executive order was put in place, but it hadn't had enough time for it to kind of take into effect. And it would have been interesting, or I guess we will have another Log4j at some point, and then it'll be interesting to know because the chaos that ensued after that of trying to figure out who was vulnerable and through what paths. It was hard for us as a vendor to assure people that we weren't affected, and that it was just really hard. So the legislation could have had a big impact on that, but it all just depends, and it was too soon to kind of tell, so it didn't have that impact. But I am curious, and I do agree with you on what you said too, that some form of legislation need this. It's hard to imagine that people will make this change on their own. Before we move on, I just want to double tap on one thing that you keep saying. I have this great strategy of when I don't know something, I always phrase it as, well, maybe our audiences don't know what you mean. So maybe our audiences don't know what you mean when you talk about memory safe applications. What are memory safe applications?
Sure. I think that the term I was using was memory safe languages. So no worries. So when you have these more native type of applications, like desktop client applications in Windows written in C++, or servers that run on Linux, Windows written in C quite often, these languages are vulnerable, and in web browsers, probably the most common application that people know that it's a native app. These languages are vulnerable to memory trespass or memory corruption type of vulnerabilities. And it's particularly because they're written in these languages, C and C++, assembly, things like that. These languages are very powerful, and they allow the programmers to make performant and very fast code. But the way that they do that is by allowing the programmer to specify exactly how to move memory around, which is very unsafe and it allows for more vulnerabilities. So if you use a programming language like C#, Java, or Go, Rust, any of these languages don't allow that to happen. And so they're safe from this whole class of vulnerabilities. Now, it's a major class of vulnerabilities because we see from Google, Mozilla, and Microsoft that 70% of their vulnerabilities in their browsers are memory corruption vulnerabilities. So just if any of these browsers went from C and C++ to Rust, that would save 70% of all the known vulnerabilities. It would just gone. They'd be gone by just changing the language. Now, the result of that may be slower software. So we've developed now, Rust, I think, is the prototypical example of this, memory safe languages that are still performant enough. So it's so close to C and C++ in terms of speed and performance, but yet it's memory safe. So you can rewrite, it would be a heck of an effort, but you could rewrite a web browser in Rust and you couldn't exploit buffer overflows in it. And that's super important.
I mean, that's what we're seeing in Linux core right now is Rust is taking a more dominant place in it. Ruster R. I just watched an interview with Linus a couple weeks ago, and him basically saying, I don't know if this is the right language, but we can't stay in the past, and it's basically getting harder and harder to find C programmers. There's a reason for that. Like, the assembly is amazing, but wow, it's a nightmare to program. And there's so many things you can do wrong in it. Love this. We keep talking about languages all day. I love this stuff. I think eventually the world's going to say we're going to do TypeScript. That's it. Period. There you go. But anyway, that's that. Call me wrong in 20 years. But I do want to talk about something again in a 20-year time frame because we're coming up on the anniversary. Or actually, we're past the anniversary of you winning the Defcon CTF back in 2003. Folks that don't want to go out and do their Google search, maybe you could just give us the quick high level. What was that CTF all about? Like, how did you get involved? Just give us that story. Kind of
Sure.
like on a dime here.
No worries. So for those that haven't run across them, CTFs or capture the flag contests are kind of public legal hacking contests, and there's different styles of them. Some of them are like pick and choose your targets. Some of them are called attack defense. So despite the style, the end goal is that there's usually some type of software that you want to attack. Sometimes there's a little network stuff mixed in. And you want to find vulnerabilities, create exploits, use them. And it's trying to emulate, it's kind of like the Hacker Olympics, essentially. It's trying to emulate a whole bunch of different types of hacking that you might see in the wild. In a contrived period. And Defcon CTF is kind of the biggest of this type of contests. It's been around the longest. It was kind of the first major CTF. And yes, I was very lucky to run with my team Anomaly back in 2003. And we ended up winning Defcon CTF. And quite often the Defcon CTF changes operating systems. So one year it might be Windows, the next year it might be Linux, and it changes quite often. Even one year they had a completely custom operating system, 100% custom, that had never been seen before. So the year I played, the operating system we used was called OpenBSD 3.0. And so we had to attack some native services on that, and then there were some custom services running on that. And it was an attack defense. So we had a virtual machine that we set up. People attacked us, and we had to prevent the attacks, but also attack other people. And there were services checks to make sure that our system ran well and that the services were running well, because we couldn't just shut everything down. So yeah, it was kind of 3 days of mayhem and fun hacking. Got very little sleep. But it was a lot of fun, and it really is the hacking Olympics. Some of the top people in the industry have won Defcon CTF, and these days it's gotten so difficult. Like the level of skill that you need to even enter it we're talking years and years of training. So you have kids that start in their teens and they don't start playing Defcon CTF until they're 20, and they've been practicing for 5 years. And it's very crazy just to see the level of competition of today. But thankfully, the organizers of these contests have understood that happens, and they've kind of created new ones. So there's one called the Open for All CTF, and they've created different ones and different flavors to invite more people. So like, hey, this one's Sands every year around just before Christmas. They do a really fun one. It's themed. It kind of has a gaming aspect to it. So I really like the variety of CTFs that are out there these days, and the fact that there's different levels. And it's not just like 20 years ago, there's only like the hardest, craziest level.
Yeah. We did a CTF ourselves at Defcon, not participating. We ran the CTF in the AppSec village, so a much smaller. The level difference we're talking about is kind of like backyard cricket compared to like the Olympic sports, but it is great. I'm amazed when I look at the CTFs how people, because it's not so much about learning hacking or knowing skills, it's about being able to really think extremely creatively around problems, and that's it's very impressive. What I was going to ask, you've been part of DevCon then for a very long time, and DevCon today is the absolute industry standard of going there. But how have you seen kind of that environment change over the last, I guess, 20 years? And are you still kind of involved in DevCon? Do you still go to DevCon 20 years on?
Yeah, so I've been to every DEF CON and Black Hat since 2002, except for 2020 and 2021 for pandemic. But I've been to all of them since then. I don't participate in CTFs anymore myself these days, but I still every year go around and talk to the organizers, whoever is organizing it at the time. And usually the organizers are past winners. So it's kind of a tradition that if you've won in the past, or usually if you get top 3, that you can be an organizer in the future. So yeah, every year I go and say hi to the organizers. I see what the teams are doing and what the challenges look like. So even though I don't participate myself, I still check it out. I go see, AppSec Village, I believe is 5 years old now. I stop by AppSec Village, say hi to that crew, and yes, I still very much participate every year, even though I'm a little bit over the hill as far as hacking goes myself. I'm more of a manager these days.
The great thing I find about the security environment, particularly offensive security, is that it's despite what people think, it's one of the most inclusive places where you can really learn so much from everyone, and people are willing to share that with you. And I came into the security world 5 years ago. After being a developer, and you're petrified the first time you speak to people, but every single time I found them all like so opening and welcoming, and I think that's part of the culture that was I think instilled in the community for a very long time, and I think that you're kind of probably part of the movement in that and forming that. So it's great, and you're definitely not. You're definitely not passing the hill on that, I must say. I'm sure you could kick most people's butt in a capture the flag today.
What I say when I hire people today is I look for people better than I was at my peak. Like that's kind of like the level that I'm looking for when I hire at IncludeSec. And yeah, I just the findings that I see, all these folks find, I'm just like, wow, I would have never gotten that. Like just so that's so off the cuff, like crazy. So I now live vicariously through my colleagues. I'm just like, that guy's awesome, that girl's awesome, I love what they do. Let's go.
Well, that's encouraging, but at the same time, it's a little intimidating from the outside, like knowing that, hey, I got this thing I freely go participate in. It sounds like I'd be welcome, but it sounds like I'm gonna have no clue what to do and get my butt kicked, like if I go try at like that level out of the gate. So what encouragement, like what advice would you give for someone who is like, I've never done a CTF, this sounds interesting, but wow, I don't want to go get shot down and feel terrible immediately.
Of course,
Like,
of course.
What would you suggest?
So just like everything in life, and Mac was using the sports analogy earlier, the backyard cricket to the Olympic level. I think that's a great analogy, because you don't just walk up to the Olympics and go, hey guys, can I join? Right? Like you you start in kind of the intramural leagues, the beer leagues, the backyard leagues, and the equivalent of that is I feel is this concept called war games. So you go online, Portswigger has the Security Academy. That's great. There's Pentester Labs. There's lots of war game platforms out there that allow you to do individual challenges, and quite often they give you like a walkthrough of each individual thing. So it's more of a learning platform. If you want to go a little more traditional, there's Pull the Plug, the Bandit war game. They used to be called Over the Wire, and that was one of my first war games, like over 20 years ago. It was just kind of to learn Unix, Linux stuff, and security from that perspective. So I really love war games. They're individual. You do them at your own pace, and quite often they have lessons built in with them. And if you want to do more DIY, then do the ones without the lessons. So you can just kind of try and figure things out yourself. And some mix between those two, of the ones with lessons, the ones that you just do yourself. You'll get to kind of a baseline level where you feel like, okay, now I can go do Open for All CTF, which is kind of a more introductory welcome CTF. So it's definitely not, anyone new to the industry, don't feel bad about you don't know anything. None of us knew anything when we joined, and it's just there's a lot more steps and information available to you these days.
I'm briefly interrupting this episode to talk about the Security Repo's sponsor, GitGuardian. GitGuardian is a code security platform that specializes in detecting secrets in your development workflows and also in your code repositories. Not only can GitGuardian bring to the surface all of those leaked secrets from way back in the history in your projects, but it can also let you know when systems have been breached by using their brand new Honey Token module. Honey Tokens are fake credentials that you can put in your environments and also in your third-party tools to know when they've been compromised. GitGuardian is free for all teams with less than 25 developers. You can sign up today at gitguardian.com. All right, back to the episode.
A general question, something that keeps popping up in various conversations. So you might be aware that CISA has an open CTF, and that is their application process, which I think is a really cool idea, because you're going to get the best and brightest at people who want to do that. But is that applicable? Like, if you're really good at solving puzzles, what's the likelihood you want to go work for the government? Like, are we using... I don't have a really firm question around this, but what do you think about that, like, disconnect of like, hey, I love solving these puzzles. It reminds me of the Cicada 4044, those guys.
Yeah.
It's great that you have made the most complicated puzzle in the history of mankind, but what are you doing with that? Where is the CTF skill apply in real life?
Yeah. I mean, solving puzzles as part of interview challenges has been around for forever. I think, back in World War II, people were doing that in the newspaper to recruit code breakers onto the Bletchley Park and things like that. So this concept's been around for a while. Now, would a person who's really good at solving technical problems be super happy working for CISA or a government or federal position? It really depends on the person, because if all you want to do is solve very deep technical problems, then maybe, unless you're doing kind of like offensive capabilities development for some like NSA or CIA like branch, unless you're doing that, you're probably not going to be doing all technical depth all day. If you're at some other agency like FDA, DOE, you're probably not doing that all day long. So it really depends on the personality of the person. But is it a valid kind of recruiting technique? And I think so. Silicon Valley's been doing it forever. If you used to drive up the 101 in California, in Silicon Valley, and there used to be this number, and that's it. It was just a number on a billboard, and you had to know that number was a URL. And then from the URL became like a little challenge, and that was an interview challenge. I think it was at Google.
Well, look, we're coming to the end, and I want to be conscious of your time. But I have some questions that I ask everyone because I love the answers that we give, and I wanted to ask you. I was like, what is the best security advice that you would give someone either wanting to get into security or maybe a business that's looking at kind of offensive security? What's the best piece of security advice that you would give them? And then afterwards, I'm going to ask you what the worst advice that you hear is. But we'll start with the best.
Sure. So you kind of gave two different directions there: the new person in security and the company looking to secure their stuff. So
pick whatever one you want.
Okay,
just pick one, whatever one you think is most relevant.
All right. Yeah. I think we talked a bit about like people new to the industry, so I'll go to the business side of things. On the business side of things, think about what all of the business side of what you do. So a challenge that I like to mention is if you're a high frequency trading platform and you're not encrypting your connection to the stock exchange, what does adding encryption do to that? It slows you down, which might lose you $1 million a year because you're slower. So think of business problems and security problems in the same world, and think of them always as a gray area. As a security professional, like I never say the word no to a company. It's always yes, but can I put a vulnerable 10-year-old instance of WordPress up and put our marketing site on it? Yes, but you keep that separate from our infrastructure. You have a backup every day of it. You do a check to make sure it's not been defaced yet. So if there's some business reason for it and it's still a horrible security idea, you could still probably make it work. But you just have to understand the ramifications of it. So do the yes, but on the security side. Think about security as a gradient of value within providing a business. And then if you're doing assessments, doing pen test type of assessments, think about what happens if you don't use like a decent company. So the end of your company or the destruction of a platform or the disclosure of PII, PHI of customers is a high impact worst case scenario. That may happen. So use your budget judiciously. Spend more when you really want to get that assurance, and spend less when you don't. So I think there you go. That's my statement for the businesses trying to work on security.
I love these questions because you get different answers all the time, and that's the fact is we live in a world of reality where these things do impact. So from a security point of view, you could say no to everything and you have to do it the secure way, but you're going to come back a year later and the same problems will be there unless you've thought through about it.
Or you won't have a job. If you say no to absolutely everything, the business can't work and they'll just let go of you, right? Like,
right. They need someone to fire when the data breach happens. So that's always a good backup.
Sometimes no. Data breaches are a very polarizing incident. Someone either gets fired or promoted. One of the two happens.
Yeah, I watched one of the most interesting panel discussions I watched was with the CISO of SolarWinds, and the topic title was "Why weren't you fired?" And he was actually promoted. They didn't have a CISO during the breach, but yeah, interesting. I digress. I have one last question because I'm conscious about your time. But what is the worst security practices that you hear or that you think are kind of out there that people need to avoid? What's some of the worst practices that you hear?
I've seen folks that come from kind of the general compliance and audit side of the house that want to transition into the security side. So I can think of one instance where I've seen somebody who was in charge of compliance at a company and then became their CISO. They didn't change their mindset. The mantra in the industry is quite often you hear compliance is not security. They are different problem sets, and like really understanding that is important. So be careful when you receive advice about security from somebody that only has a compliance mindset. I think that's kind of where I'm going with that.
That kind of looks back at the beginning of the conversation very nicely, actually. That if all you care about is checking a box, then maybe you're not doing security.
Yeah. That's very true. Hey, well, look, Erik, this has been a fascinating episode, and your answers have been quite left field to, I think, what traditional speaking lines are. So I think it's quite good to think about these things in a different way. So thank you for coming on. If our audience wants to follow you or follow Include Security, we're talking that you haven't been on social media pretty much ever, but how could they maybe follow what's happening at Include Security, or even you of podcasts or something that you're about? What's the best way?
Sure. So Include Security on Twitter, on Reddit, on LinkedIn. Just literally search for Include Security. The website's includesecurity.com. We post some blog posts about industry things and technical topics. We try and post, at least once a quarter, if not more. So yeah, I think those are good ways to find us. LinkedIn, if you're on that, is just search Include Security. You'll find us. But yeah, our team is all over the place as far as like technology specialty, and it's kind of a motley crew of expert hackers, and I love that sort of stuff that allows us to bring interesting perspectives to the industry. To your point, I'm not towing the party line is because I'm just being honest about what I see in the industry and like the economic motivations. If you kind of break things down. Yeah, maybe I can actually bring this to the larger industry at whole if I ever get to do a keynote at some conference, because these things I think need to be addressed for us to move forward together.
Very cool. Well, I'll definitely come to that keynote for sure. But look, I just want to finish up and just say thank you for coming on. All the links to Include Security are going to be in the show notes for anyone listening that wants to try and find, so you can go down there. Dwayne, any final words before we hit the big red button?
Just want to say thanks very much for coming on and being part of here. I don't think your ideas are that left field. I think they're just unsettling to people that have been in that compliance equals security box. But it's good to unsettle that state of mind. So thanks very much.